Greg, you reported today, you broke this story. Todd Downing is the new wide receivers coach. In a vacuum, before we get to the bigger picture stuff, your thoughts on Downing being the guy?
So, I guess where would I start? I mean, look, I'm not going to sort of deviate where I was last week. I mean, I've since done a lot of reporting since last time we spoke, especially since, Felger and Maz, whether it was, I had pieces at the Senior Bowl, but not enough to go off of my opinion. A lot more reporting this weekend. But, on the face of it, the Todd Downing hiring, you don't love from Josh McDaniels' perspective because it's yet another Mike Vrabel guy on the offense. And now we're up to 4 Vrabel type guys have been around Vrabel at least a little bit, to 0 with Josh McDaniels. But let's set that aside for a second and deal with, from what I understand about Todd Downing, he has a really good reputation around the league. He's done a lot of different things. He's been a quarterbacks coach with the league, whether that's the Lions, the Bills, the Raiders. He was the Raiders offensive coordinator, tight ends coach, offensive coordinator for Vrabel for 2 seasons. He was fired by Vrabel after his second season. It was with the Jets this past year as a pass game coordinator, or past 2 years, quarterbacks coach as well. From what I know about the process, and this sort of is the way it went at all the positions, they went through extensive searches. Specific to the wide receiver position, they talked to a lot of college receivers coaches. But from what I understand, Vrabel was not going to force anybody on McDaniels. From what I understand, Vrabel wasn't even involved in the Todd Downing interview. And so he wanted to make sure that if it was Todd Downing, that McDaniels really wanted him. From what I understand, that is true. McDaniels really wanted him, really liked him. From what I understand, McDaniels, he didn't even need a former receivers coach. He just wanted a really good coach. Yeah. I think it's a bonus that Todd Downing, along with Thomas Brown, can help in game planning. So I think that McDaniels really likes this hire. I mean, even if you look at the wide receivers coaches that McDaniels has had success with, like who was Chad O'Shea, who was Mick Lombardi before they were under McDaniels. And McDaniels is going to be heavily involved in a lot of the positions on this offense, specifically wide receivers. He's one of these guys we've talked about in the past about, like, the coordinator has to coach the coaches and the head coach has to coach the coordinators. And now with Josh McDaniels and all his vast experience, they have a guy who's going to do that. So the bottom line is Todd Downing is known as a really good coach. And the Patriots are excited to get him.
Yeah, a few things. I think number one, this would certainly tell us that Mike Vrabel has learned from some of the missteps in his past, and maybe he's, the fact that McDaniels was brought into this situation and given this latitude to really pick his staff and go through these interviews and go through the process, especially the tidbit that you have that Vrabel was not even included in the Todd Downing interview, I think does speak volumes to Vrabel's ability to allow Josh to have a heavy hand on that side of the football, which is what all of us had hoped. And, I think it also shows that Vrabel understands, look, Josh knows what he's doing. I don't need to micromanage that side. I don't need to be, lurking over the shoulder at all times. It's not going to be, early Bill Belichick, Josh. It's going to be more late Bill Belichick and Josh, which was Belichick let Josh do what he had to do and didn't get in the way. And I feel like that is where we're headed, which is very good. I would also say that, as I said last week on the podcast, I'm a big fan. And I know that sometimes, and Bert talked about this, about the 2 alphas, right? The Vrabel and McDaniels are 2 alphas. The first step to me of proving that these 2 guys can work together is the hiring process and how much latitude Vrabel would give Josh. And so I think they're off to a very good start as far as, are these guys going to be two Rams in the facility banging each other's heads? It doesn't seem that way, and Greg will talk more about that coming up in a minute. But I do like the idea of, and I said it last week, just get the best guys. And I know sometimes it doesn't always work, but if you can find the best, if you can find the brightest, and you can find a way to work together, now you've built kind of this, to steal Bert's word, like an alpha staff. And to go with what Greg said about how much McDaniels will be teaching these positions as well, James White, he went on a media tour last week. I think he was on almost every single podcast aside from this one and my solo one. But James has said a lot, like, about Josh knowing everything. And he knows. I was watching James with Phil Perry yesterday, and James said, look, it's amazing. You'll run a play at practice and something will go wrong. And Josh immediately will know what went wrong. And it doesn't matter if it's the offensive line, the running backs, the receivers, the tight ends, the quarterback. He has this kind of weird ability to kind of soak it all in play by play and be able to just break it down and go, okay, left guard screwed up, or okay, running back didn't do it. And so, yeah, Josh knows a lot about offense. And you bring Todd Downing in, he can work with Downing on some of the intricacies as far as wide receivers coach in that vacuum. Let me ask you this. Any shot, Greg, at an assistant wide receivers coach like many other operations have? And is there a shot that assistant could be a former player? Let's just throw it out there. And I know people might ask, what about Wes Welker? Could he be on this staff as an assistant?
I mean, it's possible. I think Wes is a little bit beyond that at this point. He's graduated from that to being like a full-fledged wide receivers coach. His name was not brought up to me, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they get some sort of, young receivers coach to bring in to be under Downing and McDaniels, but I have not heard Welker's name.
Yeah, Mike Reese did report over the weekend that Welker was at least considered. Now, we can play a lot with that word. was he seriously considered, or was he, we talked to him for a little bit, and he was on the list of 50. We don't know. All right, before we get to
one thing real quick, what you were talking about with McDaniels, like the people who know him, who've been around Josh, I mean, if people don't know already, they think he's just brilliant. And the story you just told via James White perfectly illustrates that. But this is also a guy, remember, that I think it was when Josh was in the mix for the Eagles job at one point. He told somebody there with the Eagles, he's like, in terms of seeing the game in all different facets, it's only Nick Saban and Josh McDaniels that Bill Belichick has ever been around that are that smart, that know the game that well, can basically coach every single position. It's just those two. So that just goes to speak to that.